Yo, what's good? Salutations to nations. It's your boy Young Sinai.
Angel Nine.
The first generation of video game systems. Hold on one second, I'm pulling it up. Okay, here we go. This video is by Almost Something.
In 1966, Ralph Baer was the Equipment Design Division Manager of Sanders Associates, a defense contractor. Baer was sitting at the East Side Bus Terminal in New York City, trying to figure out other uses for television besides watching TV. It was there that Baer had a radical idea. Use your TV to play games. Baer wrote down the idea in a small spiral notebook, then added it to a 4-page disclosure document that he wrote on September 1st, 1966. Baer didn't know it at the time, but his idea, which would take decades to actually create, produce, and market, would change the world.
Wow.
In today's video, we're going to dive deep into the very first video game systems and talk about how they were invented. That means talking about the systems that are widely regarded as being part of the first generation of home console games. We're also going to take a closer look at the first efforts to create handheld games, something that I think is often forgotten about because even in the 1970s, there were early handhelds.
You know how my love for handhelds, and I know y'all love handhelds. So let's take a look.
To start, we will begin at the very beginning, the very first version of Pong. Let's go back to Ralph Baer. Sanders Associates, which was Baer's employer, did not make video games. They were an electronics contractor for the United States military. Baer, however, was a key staffer in the organization. A largely self-taught engineer, Baer was a German Jew who had fled Germany as Hitler rose to power. He served in the United States Army during World War II, then got a secondary education thanks to the U.S. GI Bill, where he earned a degree in television engineering. By 1966, Baer realized that he could use those skills and that academic background to create something truly special and unique. With a large budget and numerous employees working for him, Baer was able to reallocate resources. This included employees named Bill Harrison and Bill Rush to the creation of a home console system.
That's so dope how, you can go down life on one path and then be introduced to something or introduced to a skill and take your life a completely different path. It makes me think about when Steve Jobs went to college, and I think that he took a class for scripting, like writing, and just he incorporated all of those fonts into the first Macintosh.
1967, Baer's design was in motion, and he had created a rudimentary version of two-player Pong. That design continued to evolve, and in 1969, Baer designed a prototype that could be marketed to retailers known as the Brown Box. The system was now ready, and Baer was able to start to seek out partners who could manufacture the device. General Electric and Motorola both passed. The electronics company RCA almost contracted with Baer, but ultimately chose not to. However, a staffer who had been with RCA would join Magnavox, and from there, the project was reignited. By 1971, Magnavox and Baer signed a contract to create the first ever home console system. This would be the beginning of the industry, and the start of the first generation of home console games. Now, before we go much further, I want to answer an important question. What exactly defines the tech behind this first generation? Like all of these conversations around video game generations, the answer is imprecise. After all, it's not like there is a formal generation master who sets limits. However, there are some useful ways that I think we can use to define the first generation of home consoles. First, as you can imagine, the technology was rudimentary and nothing like it is today. The first generation consoles did not contain microprocessors, instead containing discrete logic circuits. These logic circuits limited the capabilities of each system. That's why some systems, like the Magnavox Odyssey, came with game overlays and scoring paraphernalia. Over time, technology improved within this generation, allowing for better graphics and...
They also had something like that, I believe, for televisions that I guess it was like a faux color. You could put a screen on top of a black and white television and make it seem like you had color TV. I think that was a thing. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Scores to be kept on screen. This occurred thanks to the development of customizable integrated units that enhanced the graphical capabilities of each system. I'd argue that the defining characteristic of the first generation isn't so much the graphics, but the games. We are used to having game cartridges that we can take out at will, although newer systems obviously have digital downloads. For early systems, that wasn't the case. Systems were built with integrated games. Some systems could play only one game, while others could toggle between limited games. Funny enough, the Magnavox Odyssey, the first ever home console system, was actually one of the more advanced in this regard. Controllers, too, were different. Really, really different. There were no D-pads, joysticks, or buttons. In many cases, such as with TV Tennis Electro Tennis or the Home Pong series, the controllers, like the games, were part of
Yeah, I believe the first D-pad, if I'm not mistaken, was on the Game and Watch.
the system itself. In all cases, even with Magnavox Odyssey, controllers were just knobs that would turn. This limited gameplay. All you could really do was move parts within the game, but since those parts were usually limited to lines or dots, it didn't really matter all that much. Audio, too, was limited. Typically, all you really got was beeps, boops, or buzzes, if there was any audio at all. Some systems, like the Odyssey, had none.
Them beeps, boops, and buzzes went hard, though. I ain't gonna lie.
From a systems perspective, you have to start with the Magnavox Odyssey. As noted earlier, this system was developed from the brown box that
They love putting that wood coating on things back then. It's like the Atari 2600, like it had like a wood vibe.
was designed by Ralph Baer and others.
Is that a golf ball? They're using a golf ball for a joystick.
During Bayer's time at Sanders Associates. The Magnavox Odyssey was designed to connect to any television, although its name caused many to think that you actually had to connect it to a Magnavox television to make it work. The console connected to TVs via a switch box that allowed players to watch television or play a game. In fact, the Odyssey was the first system that used channel 3 or 4 in order to play. The system itself.
Oh my gosh. Channel 3. Do y'all remember that? They won't know about that these days, man. They just hit the source of the HDMI. Channel 3. I forgot about that.
Was comprised of circuitry that used a diode transistor logic to display graphics and generate the gameplay itself. Like all other systems for this time period, the Odyssey could be plugged into the wall for power. However, it did have a battery option and could actually be powered by 6C batteries. The Odyssey was relatively rudimentary at the time and capable of only displaying one line and 3 square dots of varying.
I ain't gonna lie, man. That channel 3, that made me feel good inside. I forgot all about that.
Sizes. 2 of the dots could be controlled by players 1 and 2, while the third dot was controlled by the system itself. For example, in Pong, players could move their respective dots, the paddles, and the third dot was the ball. The middle line acted as a halfway marker. Aware of the challenges with such a relatively small system, the Odyssey came with additional items to create a sense of immersion. This included graphic overlays that could be slapped on a television. It also included money and scoring items, enabling players to keep score of their games since the system wasn't actually able to do so. Indeed, the Magnavox Odyssey was so new that advertising pamphlets didn't even refer to the system as a home console or video game. They didn't seem to know how to refer to the system, with various options including a electronic game simulator, a closed-circuit electronic playground, a total play and learning experience, and the electronic game of the future.
Wow.
2 controllers were sold with the system, although the system was so new that they weren't even called controllers, but player control units.
Yo, all of this wood panels, man, it's just, I guess that was just a thing of the times because, like, you remember back then, like, in the basements, well, not back then because I wasn't alive back then, but I guess like in the 80s is what I'm referring to, but it had all these wood panel basements.
These PCUs had no buttons and came with 3 knobs that could be turned during gameplay. 1 extra peripheral was sold separately, the electronic rifle, which could be used to shoot dots on the television. 4 shooting games were used by the gun, including Shooting Gallery. As you can see, the gun really looks like a real rifle, which was obviously by design. Interestingly enough, the gun was manufactured by Nintendo.
Wow.
Unfortunately for the gun, there were real challenges with the system.
I wonder if this is the same technology that went into Nintendo's Duck Hunt
system, and rumors abounded that it was only compatible with Magnavox televisions, which wasn't true at all. As a result, the electronic rifle only sold 20,000 units. Despite the fact that it was literally the first home console ever sold, the Odyssey was the only system of its generation that came with more than just a dedicated built-in chip that allowed it to play games. Instead, it came with game cards. The cards themselves were actually printed circuit boards that caused the Odyssey to display graphics differently. Multiple games were available on the same cards. 28 games were ultimately produced for the system, made available on 11 different game cards, and 12 games were included with the system. A really high number. These games included table tennis, which we all know as Pong. Other games were very, very minor tweaks on this model, including soccer and tennis. There were math games like Analogic, chase games like Haunted House, and racing games like Fun Zoo. Promotions for the Odyssey began with advertising in mid-September 1972. As you can see in the commercials and print ads,
Hey, they got Pokemon. Look at me running back. Look.
began with advertising in mid-September
They got Pokemon.
1972. As you can see in the commercials and print ads, the system didn't so much emphasize the new technology or gameplay as it did the family-friendly aspect of what it could do. The Odyssey was sold explicitly as a family-friendly toy meant to be enjoyed by kids and adults together. The system hit the North American market in October 1972. Its cost was $99, which is about $742 in 2025 money.
Oh my
It would
gosh.
debut in the United Kingdom in 1973, then Japan and the rest of Europe in 1974. In America, the system could only be purchased through a Magnavox dealer. This added to
We're complaining about the Switch 2 prices, but look at this. Golly.
confusion that it could only be played on Magnavox televisions. Further harming the system's sales was that ads were run on a regional basis, meaning that Magnavox dealers had to place ads on their own with templates provided by Magnavox. The end of the first year, the system had only sold 72,000 units, a relatively low number, one that Bayer attributed to the high price of the system. Bayer was a little angry at Magnavox, as he felt that the company had, quote, over-engineered the device, thus driving up prices. Bayer was also concerned that the system was being advertised as if it could only be connected to Magnavox televisions. Sales of the unit continued after the 1972 holiday season, and Magnavox...
Because they was probably trying to use it. He was probably just trying to sell consoles, but they was probably trying to use it to drive up the sales for a television, which, I mean, makes sense on their end.
leaned in, engaging in a national marketing campaign and lowering the price of the console to $50. The system also added a Good Housekeeping Institute seal of approval, meaning that the device had been tested by Parents Magazine and could be returned within 30 days for a full refund. This policy probably helped the nervous consumers become more likely to buy the product, and given that the tech was new at the time, this was necessary. More systems sold, including in Japan, Europe, and some South American countries like Venezuela. Indeed, sales got stronger as time went on. During the 1974 Christmas season, the Odyssey sold 129,000 units, its best Christmas yet. By the end of its run in 1975, the system sold somewhere around 350,000 or 367,000 units. It was a success, creating a new industry and leading to the sales of more consoles. This leads us back to a fundamental point.
They got all these different versions of Pong. You can put on a hockey, or you can put on a tennis.
And one that we're going to keep seeing in this video, particularly when we get to Coleco. One of the biggest challenges in the emerging home console industry was that they simply did not have the technology to cheaply create removable media. Games were, by and large, integrated within systems. As a result, if you wanted to sell new games, you had to create new systems. And that leads us here, the Odyssey series, which eventually became the Philips series. In total, there were 8 home consoles released as part of the Odyssey series, in addition to a television that was released with a built-in Odyssey. There wasn't a ton of differences between these devices. The Magnavox Odyssey 100 came with only 2 games, tennis and hockey, and had some buzzing. The Odyssey 200 was the deluxe version of the 100. It came with a third game, Smash, which was squash, and had 4 paddles, although that largely was meant to work as 2 paddles for 2 players, rather than for 4 players. The Odyssey 300 had all 3 games, all improved, and the Odyssey 400 was an improved version of the Odyssey 200, with scoring enabled on the screen. The Odyssey 500 was an improved version on the 400, complete with better graphics, more games, and the first Odyssey to be in color. All of these systems were between $50 and $130, which was quite a bit of money back then. As such, I bet you're starting to understand why the market for home consoles was so confused and oversaturated.
Right.
More versions of the Magnavox Odyssey included the Odyssey 3000 and 4000. All improvements, such as they were very incremental. They included switches for skill levels, the ability to customize certain games like Pong, newer cases, detachable joysticks, newer games, and more. A prototype for the
I mean, they were in the beginning stages, so you know they were getting it together, and they wanted people to, you know, come along for that ride with them with their with their wallets.
Magnavox Odyssey 5000 was also produced, but never sold commercially, giving way to the Magnavox Odyssey 2. The Magnavox Odyssey series disappeared in 1976, replaced by the Philips Odyssey series. The name change was due to a change in ownership. Philips purchased Magnavox in 1974, and the name changes began shortly thereafter. New systems, the Philips 200, 2000, 2001, and 2100, were produced and sold in Europe. In most cases, these systems were more or less copies of their Magnavox counterparts. No story about the first generation of home console games is complete without discussing Nolan Bushnell and the beginning of Atari. Many videos have been made about Atari's early days. Hell, I'm probably going to have to do one myself at some.
Did y'all know that Steve Jobs used to work for Atari? And they said that he stunk so bad, like they had to send him home, like because he wouldn't put on no daggone deodorant. Like, dude, put on some deodorant.
Point. So I don't want to go too deep into the story. The TLDR version is this. Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney founded Syzygy Engineering in 1971 with the goal to produce a standalone computer game and monitor for commercial sales. This would eventually lead to the creation of Computer Space, one of the first ever commercially available arcade games. Computer Space was not a commercial success, but the idea had promise, and Syzygy contracted with Bally Manufacturing, a leading
I like the name of that company, Syzygy.
Manufacturer of pinball games, to create another arcade game. Using the money supplied to them by Bally, Bushnell and Dabney hired Al Alcorn. After seeing Magnavox's tennis, Bushnell gave Alcorn a test assignment: create a tennis-like game. The assignment was meant to warm Alcorn up and test his skills, but after being told the game was for a contract with General Electric, he took it seriously and designed what wound up becoming Pong. A prototype of Pong would be placed in Andy Capp's Tavern in Sunnyvale, California.
Wait, I'm confused. Didn't they already make Pong? Isn't that what the first 12 minutes of this video was about? Was Pong? So he made Pong, a new Pong. I must have missed something. I'm sorry. Please explain to me in the comments what I missed. I know I can be slow sometimes.
California. It was made from a few cheap parts and a $75 black and white television set from a local Walgreens drugstore. The game was such a hit that it
So he's saying that they're saying that he made Pong for the arcade. Okay.
broke because its quarter tray was too full. The arcade version would be a massive hit, so much so that Atari began to look into expanding their market presence. This required technological advances, but with the development of the large-scale integration chip, it had become possible to take Pong and create a home console version. Atari engineer Harold Lee proposed just that. Alcorn and Lee would work on the project, codenamed Darlene, after an Atari employee. By late 1974, a prototype had been designed, and Atari began to approach retailers. One, in particular, was interested. Sears, the retail giant and one of the biggest sellers of consumer goods in America at the time. Tom Quinn, an employee at Sears, saw potential in the device right away and offered Atari an exclusive deal. Atari, believing that they could find better deals elsewhere, declined. That wound up being a mistake, as traditional retailers found that the system was too expensive.
See, sometimes you try to hold out to get a better deal, but sometimes there ain't no better deal. And then, I don't know if it's going to touch on this, but Sears ended up releasing a lot of different handhelds. I don't know if it's going to talk about that.
Back to Quinn, who Atari ran into again in 1975. Quinn invited Alcorn and Gene Lipkin, Atari's vice president of sales, to the Sears Tower in
Man, I got a foot massager that looks just like that.
Chicago. With a prototype in hand, Atari made the trip and ran into a massive problem. Interference with the antenna on Sears Tower rendered the device inoperable. Alcorn quickly made the needed adjustments, got the system working, and the deal was a go. Quinn and Sears requested 150,000 units by Christmas, more than double what Atari could produce at the time. They signed the deal anyway, and were able to find more capital to expand their manufacturing capabilities. The system, released in late 1975 in North America and Japan, was manufactured under the Sears Telegames brand. It came with 2 pedals and 1 game only. The system sold for $98.95, which is about $600 in today's money. It was, of course, not particularly advanced, given that it only played 1 game.
Could you imagine? See, we over here tripping off. Are we just broke? Like, maybe it's because eggs are like $19 for a carton, but we over here complaining about Mario Kart being potentially $80. They dropping $600 a game. Man, we just broke, man.
Game.
Name one game that you would pay $600 for. Is there any game that has $600 worth of replay value?
To the point, its sales were reduced, with only 150,000 units being sold. By 1976, Atari moved on and sold their own version of the system, separate from Sears. However, that was not before Atari faced down a major threat in the form of a lawsuit from Magnavox. Ralph Baer had clearly invented Pong first. His version of tennis was barely...
Okay, I didn't miss something. I'm like, they already invented Pong. How they reinventing a game that was already like what? Okay, I ain't gonna lie, man. I felt stupid. Okay,
Distinguishable from Pong, and Bayer had kept extremely detailed records which proved he invented tennis back in 1966. It had also been proven that Bushnell had
he didn't invent tennis. He invented electric tennis.
played that version of tennis. Without the funds to pursue the case, Atari settled and became a licensee of Magnavox for $1.5 million.
Wow.
Magnavox was also able to obtain information on any of Atari's products over the next year. This, in turn, delayed the release of the Atari 2600 by a few months, allowing Atari to obviate the legal need to turn over information to Magnavox. And then there was Coleco. Unlike other names in the first or even second generation of consoles,
Did you have a ColecoVision? I had one. I bought it off eBay. It didn't work, but I didn't care because I just could say I had a ColecoVision.
Coleco was not an obvious choice to enter the new video game market. Coleco Industries was founded in 1932 as the Connecticut Leather Company, where it supplied leather and shoe materials to clothing manufacturers. By the
What on
1960s, the leather portion of the company was sold, and Coleco began to make above-ground pools. The company continued its diversification efforts, purchasing toy companies. Sensing an opportunity in the 1970s, Coleco entered the video game market and wound up producing one of the biggest hits of the era, albeit not without some major revisions to its original.
How you go from creating, from making belts to making pools to making video games? But like, to be honest, Nintendo had kind of the same story because Nintendo didn't start off, as a video game company. They started off, I believe, as a card company in Japan. And Nintendo was a lot of things. Like they had a taxi company, they had a hotel. And it was kind of known for, being promiscuous at Nintendo hotels. Like that's kind of what their reputation was.
System. The first version of the Coleco Telstar, released in 1976, looks very familiar to those of you who have seen these systems before. It came with 2 fixed pedals and 3 games: hockey, handball, and tennis.
So everybody just selling Pong. You got all these different options to play Pong,
of which were basically Pong variants. A toggle switch on the front panel enabled users to switch between games. Before the system could be released, it had to pass interference tests from the United States FCC, or Federal Communications Commission. And there, it ran into problems. Coleco failed the tests, as the machine was generating radio interference.
Oh,
Coleco
wow.
couldn't fix the problem on their own, and wound up calling in Ralph Baer, yes, that Ralph Baer, who created ferrite ring.
Could you imagine you just trying to play ColecoVision with your family and like your ColecoVision is like messing up all of the airplane signals in the sky? That's crazy.
That blocked the interference and solved the problem. The Telstar was approved for release and hit the market on Father's Day 1976. It was priced under the Atari Home Pong console, and that made it an immediate hit. However, this machine was just the start for Coleco. In the end, owing largely to the impossibility of creating removable media, there were 14 different versions of the Coleco Telstar, each seemingly more ridiculous than the last. Some versions, like the Coleco Telstar Classic, were barely even upgrades of the original system, coming with slightly different casing or a stand. However, some of these systems did come with new features, new games, or updated graphics.
Yo, if you're watching this, it's nothing for you to like and subscribe. I'm on my journey to 1,000 subs. Please help me out. You know what I'm saying? And if you like it, more people will take a look.
For example, the Coleco Telstar Ranger came with a light gun and 3 new shooting games. It also came with new features like automatic or manual ball control and experience levels. In 1977, Coleco released the Coleco Telstar Colormatic. As the name implies, this system was breaking into color games, with color graphics now being available. 1977 also saw the release of the...
Oh, that looked tight. I will buy that now. I don't know what it plays, but I would buy that. That look dope. They need to make a joystick like that.
Combat! Yes, there is an exclamation mark, and as you can see, wow, is this different looking. This system came with 4 joysticks and began to push home consoles into the traditional shooting area. It came with 4 military games: Combat, Night Battle, Robot Battle,
and Call of Duty.
and Camouflage Combat. The Coleco Star Gemini, released in 1977, came with 4 pinball games and 2 light gun games, marking a total break from the traditional Pong games of the past. Finally, the last model, the Telstar Arcade.
Hey, yo, that's hard. Yo, imagine that with Grand Theft Auto. Okay, you whipping, You got the blicky. You just pull that mug out while you whip it. Okay, I see what they was going for.
It is perhaps the most unique. It comes with this truly odd triangle design that contains a steering wheel, light gun, and paddles. Multiple games could be found on this system. The Coleco Telstar was a commercial success. Combined versions of the system sold more than 1 million units, making it the most successful North American home console system. Coleco's success was largely built around their prescience. The first generation of home console
You ain't never gonna find one that don't got tennis.
systems was powered largely by chips that were produced by Texas Instruments. Texas Instruments, not realizing how popular these systems would be, underestimated demand and
Okay, calculator company getting into video game scene. I see you.
did not make nearly enough chips to fulfill orders. However, Coleco was smart enough to place their order early, resulting in the company getting their full allotment of ordered chips, something that not every home console maker could say. I think it's worth noting that, as undeniably strange as this system looked, they knew what they were doing. The multiple systems allowed for more games and variants than almost anything else on the market at the time, thus ensuring that Coleco was well positioned to not only avoid repetition and players getting bored, but ensure that there was enough gaming material for interested parties. It
I wonder how Coleco fell off.
is truly creative, not just a cash grab, something that quite a few other systems at the time couldn't say. It also launched Coleco to the top of the home console.
Look at that. Look at this right here. You got tennis, handball, okay, which is just one player Pong. Then you got hockey, which is Pong with goals.
Console market. The company would wind up selling more than $100 million in game consoles. The previous consoles were largely concentrated on the American audience. The Magnavox Odyssey was released worldwide, although other Odyssey series launches were largely limited to America. Home Pong did see release in Japan, but the Coleco Telstar series was only released in the United States. However, we would be remiss if we did not cover the best-selling home console series of the first generation, even if it didn't see an American release. That would be the Color TV series, which was created by Nintendo. Long before they made the Famicom, Nintendo had a long and storied history in the toy-making business.
See, what I tell y'all, they made playing cards. Y'all thought I was lying. Y'all thought I didn't know what I was talking about.
Including in the video game space. Nintendo's history goes all the way back to 1889, when Fusajiro Yamauchi founded the company as Nintendo Koppai. At the time, Nintendo made Hanafuda playing cards. Over time, the company would grow, go public, and diversify into more toys.
I'm going to say something about the card company, and my details are a little shaky, so, fact check me. But those cards, people use them to gamble with. And I think that, a certain type of card is illegal there in Japan, but Nintendo made these cards, and it was kind of like a workaround, like a loophole, something like that.
Company's first electronic toy, and the first ever made in Japan, was the beam gun, which sold more than 1 million units. The gun would fire a light beam that would register on various targets. The success of the beam gun, combined with the success of other toys, including the laser clay shooting system and the Wild Gunman skeet shooting game, made Nintendo realize that a profitable future lay in additional electronic toys and home consoles.
So is that like a Nintendo arcade type?
Hiroshi Yamauchi, now president of the company, was able to acquire the distribution rights for the Magnavox Odyssey in 1974. This successful venture led to a partnership with Mitsubishi Electric in 1975. As a result of that partnership, Mitsubishi and the Nintendo Research and Development 2 unit were able to create the Color TV game series. Like the Magnavox and Telstar before it, the Color TV game series came with numerous models. In total, there were 5. The Color TV 6, the Color TV 15, the Game Racing 112, the Game Block Breaker, and the Computer TV game. In the beginning,
here I am thinking that the first Nintendo console was the NES. Man, you learn something new every day.
Nintendo leaned heavily on its partnership with Magnavox. They licensed Pong and used that as the base for their Color TV 6, which had 6 versions of Pong. Sort of. The 3 games, hockey, volleyball, and tennis, were obviously slightly tweaked versions of Pong. Each game could be played as a single-player or 2-player game, hence the 6 games. There were actually some additional customizations available as well, including the ability to increase or decrease the size of the racket and how fast the ball moved. As such, the Color TV system came with customization levels that were previously unseen. The system was simple, cheap, and quick to produce. It sold for 9,800 yen, or $64.68 in 1977. Translated to 2025,
they were smashing the prices.
the system only cost $335, making it much cheaper than every other system available on the market at the time, something that Nintendo leaned into heavily in their
Wow.
advertisements.
That's kind of like the same route that they took with the Game Boy. Like, yeah, you guys might have these other heavy duty handhelds that have color and all of this stuff, but we're just going to sell you a cheap product and you're going to like it.
Color TV 6 was released on June.
I mean, really, up until the Switch 2, that's always been their strategy, is to have a console that doesn't cost as much as the competition.
June 1st, 1977, and the Color TV 15 was released 1 week later. When it was first released, the system cost 15,000 yen, though the price would be reduced over time. For the added price, the TV 15 came with more games and detachable controllers. A slider controlled access to the different games, which included 2 versions of tennis, volleyball, and hockey. The game also came with ping pong and a shooting game. 1 year later, the game Racing 112 made its premiere. As the name and steering wheel clearly indicate, the game was made for racing, and it was one of the first home consoles ever made with an enclosed steering wheel. It also came with 2 pedals and an attached gear.
Hey, that look hard. Yo, that part on the right here, hold up. That, you know what they should have made that? A radio. That would have been dope. Like, you can switch between the tunes.
Shift. These various attachments made it larger than the other systems, but it was still cheaper, costing only 12,000 yen. The enclosed game was a top-down racer called Speed Race, although that game came with numerous variations, including different sized screens and faster or slower opponents. The game was such a hit that it became a minigame in the Game Boy Advance game WarioWare Inc., which was released in 2003.
That's cool.
April 1979 saw the release of Block Breaker, which sold for 13,500 yen. This system came with 6 versions of Breakout. Not for nothing, but the Block Breaker...
Did Nintendo invent Breakout? Is that a Nintendo original game?
was the first system ever made by Nintendo, which prominently featured the name Nintendo on the system itself. If the casing of the system looks special, there may be a reason.
I did not know that Nintendo had all of these home consoles before the NES. If you knew that, let me know.
For that, it was the first designed by new Nintendo employee Shigeru Miyamoto, the genius behind so many games that we love today, including Mario. As part of the effort to sell the game, some department stores would have competitions. Winners would come home with this Medal of Honor to signify their victory. Finally, 1980 saw the release of the TV computer game, which came with a version of Othello. However, at this point...
Man, yo. Back then, Nintendo giving out medals. Now they charging you to use a product demo on the Switch too.
The second generation of home console systems was well underway, and Japanese customers had access to an array of updated systems. As such, dedicated consoles, like the TV game series, were starting to become less popular, despite the fact that the TV computer game was essentially an arcade-perfect version of Othello. The rarity of these systems made them a collector's item. Even back in 2009, versions of the TV computer game were selling on eBay for as much as $2,000. All 5 of these systems were huge hits, despite their limited release in Japan only. The TV Color 6 and TV Color 15 sold 1 million units each. The Racing 112 and Block Breaker sold 500,000 units each, meaning that the system in total sold over 3 million units, making it the most commercially successful of the first generation of home consoles. All 5 systems were sold until 1983, when they were replaced by the Famicom. It goes without saying that the Famicom, Nintendo Entertainment System, and everything else produced by Nintendo would never have been possible if the Color TV series had not been such a major commercial success. By making a real impact on consumers, Nintendo was able to create a profitable line of toys. I'd also argue that the initial success of the series, followed by the market's change to removable media via game cartridges, showed...
Which I'm actually going to do a video about the guy who invented the game cartridge. I've been procrastinating, ADHD kicking in, but the dude who invented the game cartridge was a black guy, and I got a book about him from the library, which is overdue. And they're telling me I need to hurry up and return it, and I'm not allowed to renew it anymore. But yeah, I'm gonna do a video about him. It's pretty dope.
Nintendo what they needed to do with their next generation of home console systems. Now, just to be clear, these were the major best-selling home consoles, but they weren't the only ones. There are dozens of home console systems. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, why haven't I heard of these? Why don't I remember them at all? Well, A huge chunk of them were straight-up rip-offs or slightly tweaked versions of other systems that were released in different regions. For example, in 1973, the Overcall was released by Inter Electronica in Spain. This machine was described as a clone of the Magnavox Odyssey, which is funny considering that another company, C. Lorenz AG, actually made a European version of the Odyssey in 1973. That, I think, speaks volumes about the sheer number of consoles that were available at the time. Indeed, there were literally hundreds of Pong consoles that were released across the world. Germany had the TVG-10, the 9017 color.
So was old boy getting paid off for all of these people using Pong? I know that he sued Atari, but what about all these other people who are using Pong? Is he licensing it out? Like, how is this working?
TV game, the Poppy 9015, and more. Australia had the TV game system. The United Kingdom had 3 systems by Radiofin, the Acitronic Telesports 4, and more. France had the Paris Video CB812. You get the idea. Now, there was some creativity and differentiation among these more minor systems. Italy saw the release of the TVG-872, which was part of the PC-50X series. Other versions of this console, including the Gammatic 8600 programmable video game and the CX336 game cassette system, were released in Korea and Spain. Some systems, like the 90TV game, released by Poppy in Germany, had Pong, but also had racing games. Systems, like the Hong Kong TV Sport, released by Soundic, were Pong, but came in color. RCA released the Studio 2, which came with a built-in keyboard instead of a joystick or knobs. The system also came with 5 built-in games. Heck, even Atari experimented with some new dedicated systems. For example, the Stunt Cycle C450 came with 4 racing games, and the Video Pinball C380 was a home pinball console. However, by and large, these systems were all Pong.
That's cool. I would get that, the Video Pinball, but that don't look like, hold on, I'm trying to look at these pictures. That don't look like the pinball I know of.
And Pong games. Pong was such a massive hit that its success was cloned over and over and over again on a slew of systems that were too numerous for us.
That's crazy that he made such a good idea. Like that the first system, like he straight hit a home run, knocked it out of the park with the game. People still play Pong to this day. Like I would play Pong. Pong is a fun game. But the fact that he knocked it out of the park that hard that so many people made money off of that idea, that's crazy.
To be able to accurately cover. The vast majority of the games that were released during this period were Pong consoles, and since most games didn't have any sort of removable media, that was all these consoles would be. It's no wonder, then, that the word oversaturated quickly became the best way to describe the growing home console market. If you know about the 1983 video game crash, link in the description below, then you likely know that oversaturation and a lack of differentiation was a huge cause behind the crash.
And E.T.
What you may not know is that there was a lesser video game crash during the heart of this generation, 1977. The 1977 crash, while not being nearly as catastrophic, did have some important hints about the far more devastating crash that would occur 6 years later, and led some to believe that video games were truly only temporary. In this crash, once again, oversaturation was the culprit. With a massive number of home consoles available on the market, most regular customers had no idea what console to buy, and all suffered accordingly. As noted in the Ultimate History of Video Games, Magnavox and Atari were forced to sell inventory at heavily reduced rates. By 1978, Coleco lost more than $22 million and had to destroy over 1 million unsold Telstar units.
Okay, so that answers my question as far as what happened with Coleco.
Companies like RCA, which was selling the Studio 2, lost money on their product, selling barely more than 64,000 units, and ultimately...
Ooh, that is ugly. That is an ugly console. They've been showing some consoles that look kind of cool, but that is ugly. That beige and brown, that look like one of the telephones that I used to use back in the 90s when it still had the cord. That looked just like a telephone. It was hideous.
Leaving the industry for good. Fortunately, this crash helped prune the field, and when the second generation of consoles began a few years later, there were fewer systems. Handheld games were not as popular during this era as their home console counterparts, and let's be honest, that makes sense. The games just weren't that good. However, that's not to say that they were completely unsuccessful. In fact, in at least one case, a handheld system sold more than other home console systems of the generation. The first handheld game created was Auto Race, sold in 1976 by Mattel, marking Mattel's first entry into the video game market, and certainly not their last. The only mechanical component of this game was the on-off switch and the controls. In the game, the player controls a car. Opposing cars move towards the player, and the job of the player is to move their vehicle out of the way. The object was to beat the game in the quickest time possible, with ratings being given to players who were able to complete the game in a set amount of time. The game was relatively simple, although it did come with a 1 through 4 gear that altered the speed of the game. The game also came with minor audio sound effects, including little bleeps and bloops. The game actually came from a simple source, a calculator. Mattel engineer George Kloss was inspired by arcade games featuring cars. As such, he took a calculator and used the individual displays for the purpose of creating cars. The game was very successful.
Wow. So using the inspiration of a calculator has apparently been used multiple times when inspiring people to make handheld games, because that's what inspired them to make the Game & Watch. Was I can't remember the creator of his name, but he was on a subway or he was on a train and he saw someone playing on their calculator and he thought, man, that would be pretty cool, if it was like a handheld game. So
even at its relatively expensive price of $25, which is around $140 in 2025 money. In fact, the game was such a hit that the Soviet Union would clone the game. Known as the Elektronika IER-01, this game premiered in Russia in 1983. Auto Race was such a hit that it had a major impact on Mattel. Mattel would use the game's success to create the Mattel Electronics division. That, in turn, led to the creation of other handheld games, including sports games like football and tennis. In 1979, Mattel officially entered the home console market with the relatively powerful Mattel Intellivision. The most powerful handheld game of this generation was the Merlin.
I had an Intellivision too that didn't work, and I bought it off eBay, and I bought it just to say that I had an Intellivision.
It's important to clarify what the Merlin actually was. First, it was nothing, and I mean nothing, like the Game Boy or any other similarly situated system. The Merlin kind of looked like a funky red phone. It contained 11 squares, each with an LED light. 4 buttons on the bottom of the Merlin allowed for players to select or control the games. Despite its strange shape and size, the Merlin came with 6 games: Tic-Tac-Toe, Music Machine, Echo, Blackjack 13, Magic Square, and Mind Bender. It packed all of this into a CPU.
Yeah, my mind is definitely bent.
That had a mere 48 bytes of memory. The Merlin was actually wildly commercially successful.
Wow.
It sold more than 5 million units.
Oh my
gosh! It was the best-selling
gosh.
toy in America in 1980, moving more than 2.2 million units that year.
What?
The game was so popular that a Master Merlin, which contained more games, was released shortly thereafter.
Oh,
In
snap.
1995, the toy was re-released again, this time as Merlin: The 10th Quest. Not
I am shocked. I've never heard this.
bad. There was also the Milton Bradley Microvision, which made its premiere in 1979. The Microvision varied wildly from other systems at the time in that it didn't contain an internal CPU. Instead, each game did. That made the system revolutionary for multiple reasons, chief of which is that the Microvision became the first handheld system ever made to use cartridges rather than internal media only. The Microvision went on sale in November 1979, priced at $49.99, or about $220 in today's money. The console itself was an extremely small LCD screen that was powered by a 9-volt battery. The small screen, a mere 16 by 16 pixels, kept power consumption down, but it obviously limited the graphical capabilities of the machine. Only 12 games were available for the system, another dampener on sales. Further hampering its long-term commercial viability is the numerous technological problems that the device encountered, which included screen rot, damage to the microprocessor, and tearing of the keyboard. All of this made the device much, much less durable than it needed to be. Only 150,000 units were ever sold. The Microvision is actually the perfect place to stop our examination of the first home console generation because it straddled the line. Its removable media probably makes it part of the second generation of systems, but its relatively poor machine quality, time of manufacturing, and low-grade graphics also make an argument for its inclusion as a first-generation system. Regardless, home console generations always overlap, and in 1976, the second generation of home console systems began with the introduction of the Fairchild Channel F. Produced by Fairchild Camera and Instrument and designed by Jerry Lawson.
That's the dude. That's the dude whose book I said I checked out. Hold on. I'm going to try to. Hold on. I'm going to get the book. Hold on. See? I told y'all that's the dude. Hold up. Let me get it closer. Hold up. See? Jerry changed the game. I'm going to do a video about him. My ADHD is like ADHDing. All right, my bad, y'all. I got excited. I wanted to do it for Black History Month because I thought that would have been super dope, but it'd be hard having ADHD sometimes. I ain't gonna lie.
The Channel F, the F was for fun, was boundary breaking in many ways. It was the first home console system to use game cartridges and the first to be based around a microprocessor rather than more primitive electronic systems. For its time, the system looked incredibly sharp and was capable of producing more colors than anything else on the market. It sold more than 310,000 units before its 1983 discontinuation. A solid number, but nothing compared to the granddaddy of this generation and one of the most successful home console systems of the time, the Atari 2600. But that's a story for another video. Thank you so
See, they got that wood grain on that Atari 2600 too. They love that wood grain back in the day, for real.
much for watching this one, folks. It was obviously longer, but the response to the 1983 Crash video that I did was good, so I figured we'd make a run of this. If you liked the video, please let us know in the comments below, and as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what to record next. More importantly, if you liked the video, please like it.
Yeah, that was a great video. He did a lot of research, so shout outs to him. What's the name of this channel? Hold on. His channel is Almost Something.
Ranking all of my controllers on their joysticks.
I clicked something wrong, but it was Almost Something. That's the name of his channel. So go ahead and make sure that y'all go check out his channel. Seems like he got some dope stuff going on. All right, y'all. It's been real. I appreciate y'all rocking with me. Please subscribe, okay? I am on my journey to 1,000 subs. Thank you for everyone who has subscribed. I appreciate everybody who tuned in, especially how late it is, man. Y'all need to go to sleep. Y'all probably got to go work in the morning. So I appreciate y'all kicking it with me. And salutations to the nations. Peace.
Angel Knot.